Good morning, students. Yesterday, in part 1 of the third level, we read that man named Charlie hallucinates and reaches the third level of the Grand Central Station, which only has two levels. Let's continue with the story. Sometimes I think Grand Central is growing like a tree, pushing out new corridors and staircases like roads. So Charlie says that how he feels that this Grand Central station is like a tree. He's comparing the station with a tree with many roots and branches. So every time when though he has been at the station hundred of times, but he lands up into new places or destinations. He heads to something else and reaches to hotel lobby or to the office building. So he says it's growing like a tree with new corridors, new staircases, new tunnels. There's probably a long tunnel that nobody knows about, feeling its way under the city right now on its way to Times Square and maybe another to Central Park. So Charlie wonders that this Grand Central Station is growing like a tree with many new corridors and staircases, and he says that might be at this time under my feet there might be a huge tunnel, a long tunnel that might be heading to Times Square or Central Park. So he says that this tunnel, this probably, that means it won't be a big deal that a long tunnel is there and nobody knows it. It's a secret tunnel, and that tunnel is under the city right now and it is heading to Times Square or Central Park. So with this description, one can understand how Grand Central Station is a huge place where people get lost. And maybe because for so many people through the years, Grand Central has been an exit, a way of escape. So it says that this station, this Grand Central, has been an exit place, a way to escape from the realities. This escape might be for the people from anxiety, from fear, from tensions, from complexities, from insecurities. So this is an exit place, an exit point where people want to escape. Maybe that's how the tunnel I got into, and maybe this is the reason might be that I got into the tunnel which headed to the third level, and though there is not any third level on the Grand Central Station. But I never told my psychiatrist friend about that idea. Now he says that this perception of mine that Grand Central is growing like a tree with many corridors, tunnels, and staircases. Grand Central is a place where people want to escape from, where it's a place which exactly is an exit point from where people want to escape. So this idea, this perception, I did not share with my psychiatrist friend. The corridor I was in began angling left, angling that is turning left, and slanting, slanting that is leaning, sloping downward, and I thought I was wrong. So he says from first level, from where the uh, trains of 20th century run, on second level where suburban trains run, I headed to the third level, and this corridor when I'm going, as I'm moving, this is angling turning to left and is sloping downward, and I realized that I'm wrong. I'm going to a wrong path. I'm going to a wrong corridor. But I kept on walking, but then I kept on walking. Why? Because I was very late for that night. I wanted to reach to my apartment. I wanted to reach to my wife. All I could hear was the empty sounds of my own footsteps, and I didn't pass a soul. So he says that all I could hear was my own footstep. That is, he was all alone. He did not see people around, and his footsteps were echoing. Then I heard that sort of hollow roar ahead, that means open space and people talking. And then after some time he heard the noise coming from some open space and the noise of the people talking. The tunnel turned a sharp left. I went down a short flight of stairs, and came out on the third level at Grand Central Station. So he says the tunnel turned sharp left. He headed from a corridor to the tunnel, and then he had to move down to certain flight of stairs, and then he entered the third level, and this was the third level of Grand Central Station. For just a moment, I thought I was back on the second level, but I saw the room was smaller. So it was just for a fraction of time he felt that he's on the second level. But then he notices what? That the room over there was small. There were fewer ticket windows and train gates, and the information booth in the center was wood and old looking. So he says, I noticed that the ticket windows were less in number. The train gates I could see, and the information booth that was there on the third level, it was all wooden work, and it had an old look, the old look of the earlier times. And the man in the booth wore a green eye shade and long black sleeve protectors. So he says the man who was sitting in the booth, that is the information booth, he was wearing green eye shades and long black sleeve protectors. The lights were dim and sort of flickering, shaking. Then I saw why. They were open flame gas lights. So it says that the light was very dim, and realized that this dim light is flickering. Then he notices why there is a dim light and why it is flickering. He saw that it was a gas light and the flames were flickering. There were brass spittoons on the floor. So Charlie tells us that on the floor, that is on the third level, when he has reached to the third level of Grand Central Railway Station, he sees that on the floor there are numerous spittoons, and they were of brass, and spittoons are large containers where people spit. And across the station a glint of light caught my eye. A man was pulling a gold watch from his vest pocket. So he says the light was dim at this station, and he says why it was dim, because they had open flame gas lights. So he says I was attracted to a light, the unsteady light, and this light was coming from where? This light was coming from a man who was pulling the gold watch from his vest pocket. So not like these days. These days we wear on a wrist, but earlier times people used to have those watches. They used to keep that in pocket. So this person takes out this gold watch, and the reflection falls on Charlie. He snapped open the cover, glanced at his watch, and frowned. So this person who had this gold watch, he opens the cover of that watch and notices, looks at the time and frowned. So he got angry. He had some plans or whatever. He was not happy with the time. He wore a derby hat, a black 4-button suit with tiny lapels, and he had a big black handlebar mustache. So this person who had this gold watch was wearing a derby hat, and he was wearing a suit. Which suit? 4-button. There were 4-button suit, that is a black in color, with tiny lapels. Lapels are front parts of the top of a coat or jacket that are joined to the collar and are folded back. And he had a big black handlebar mustache. Handlebar mustache is that the mustache is curved upward at each end. Then I looked around and saw that everyone in the station was dressed like 18, 19 something. So then he notices and he realizes that most of the people were having the hat, and they were having this fashion trend was handlebar mustache. And then he realized that this is something between 18th, 19th century I have landed. I never saw so many beards, side buns, and fancy mustaches in my life. So he says this is not the trend of the present time. So he had never seen so many beards and side buns and fancy mustaches. So he realized he was on the third level. A woman walked in through the train gate. She wore a dress with leg of mutton sleeves and skirts to the top of her high button shoes. So a woman comes out from a train, and she is wearing a dress, and this dress has sleeves. This dress are sleeves that are high leg of a mutton sleeves. That was the style, the fashion trend at that period of time, the 18th century. And skirts to the top of her high buttoned shoes. And back of her out on the tracks, I caught a glimpse of a locomotive. So he notices behind that woman the train, the engine, and he notices what? That a locomotive, a very small courier and eve locomotive with a funnel shaped stack. So he notices the locomotive, the manufacturing of the locomotive was courier and eve, and it had a chimney, and this was funnel shaped. And then I knew, and then he realized that this is not the present world, this is the world of 18th century. And he had landed on the third level. To make sure, I walked over to a newsboy and glanced at the stack of papers at his feet. Now, to validate his suspicion, he had to be very sure where he is. So he goes to the newsboy. He picks up a paper. This newsboy was having a heap of papers, a stack of papers, newspapers. So he had a look at one of the papers. It was The World. That is, it was the newspaper The World, and the world hasn't been published for years. So years has gone, that world is not published. The lead story said something about President Cleveland, and the main headlines of the newspaper were related to President Cleveland. I have found that front page since in the public library files, and it was printed June 11, 1894. So it says that even in public libraries I have seen newspapers of the world, and the paper that was in his hand, it had the date of 11th June 1894, and that was the surety that he has landed on the third level and he has landed in the 18th century. I turned towards the ticket windows, knowing that here on the third level at Grand Central, I could buy tickets that would take Louisa and me anywhere in the United States we wanted to go in the year 1894. And I wanted 2 tickets to Galesburg, Illinois. So he says that when I realized that I was on the third level, I went to the ticket window. I wanted to buy windows for me and my wife. Why? Because this station is going to make me go anywhere in the United States, and I wanted to go in Galesburg, Illinois, and I wanted to go in the year 1894. Have you ever been there? It's a wonderful town, still with big old frame houses, huge lawns, and tremendous trees whose branches meet overhead and roof the streets. So he asked that, have you ever been to Galesburg, Illinois? And he says that it is a beautiful town. It's still, it's peaceful, it's calm, it's pleasant, with big old frame houses. So houses are big, and the houses have huge lawns. And then he says that the streets are covered like a canopy by the branches of the trees meet overhead, and it turns out to be a canopy. The streets are covered with those. And in 1894, summer evenings were twice as long, and people sat out on their lawns, the men smoking cigars and talking quietly. So it says in 1894 the summer evenings were beautiful, pleasant. Why? It was long. It was not like these days. And people used to sit in lawns, people used to chit chat, they used to talk, men used to cigar, and the men used to smoke cigar and talk quietly, and the women waving palm leaf fans with the fireflies all around. And because of the fireflies, the women used to wave the palm leaf fans in a peaceful world. And 1894 was a peaceful world, a beautiful world where peace, serenity, calm, happiness reigned. To be back there was the first, with the first world war still 20 years off. So he says, I want to be back to the Galesburg in 1894, where after 20 years the World War First would be happen. What World War First would take place, and World War Two over 40 years in the future, and 40 years after. And if he is in 1894, it will take 40 years for the Second World War. So he says that this period of time where there were no consequences of both the wars, the life was peaceful, fun, happiness, calmness, serenity, beautiful days, family around. So he's telling us about this world. I wanted two tickets for that, and for this reason that this was a beautiful and a peaceful life, I wanted two tickets. So I went to the ticket counter to get two tickets for me and my wife so that we can go to Galesburg, Illinois, and enjoy that life of peace and serenity and happiness.